Hi, I'm Leanne Young. Today we look back into our city's immigrant history by way of food we all eat and products we all buy. This is Our Vancouver. Coming up, the push for governments to live up to a legendary land rights ruling in BC. And the stories behind Canada's comfort food, Chinese takeout. But first, honoring the huge contribution by one of BC's most successful entrepreneurs. I bet most of you have been to a London Drugs, right? But what do you know about the company's founder? The Canadian Chinese Museum is offering you a couple ways to get to know more. Ling is the exhibition and program manager at the Chinese Canadian Museum, and Larry Chin is the co-producer of Seeds to Success, the film and tour. So welcome to the both of you. Sarah, how did this exhibit come about, first of all?
Well, this exhibition was inspired by a traveling display that is currently in our gallery at 27 East Pender called A Tale of Two Families. That exhibit was produced by the Royal BC Museum and profiles both the H.Y. Louie family and the Guichon family, two of the oldest families in our province. And so we recognize that the H.Y. Louie family really has its roots in Vancouver, Chinatown, and that there was such a long and deep legacy that we needed to explore and highlight even more. So that was really the impetus for developing the exhibition. And this tour really builds upon that as a program that connects this story to Chinatown as a living museum itself.
And so, Larry, you helped to produce the film and the tour. What do participants actually do during the tour?
Yeah, so the tour is component of two parts. Okay. The inside portion at the exhibit, and the second half, we take them on a short walk, on a small journey from the exhibition space to the actual space where the H.Y. Louie family started.
And so where do they start? You have to let me know.
Yeah, we start at Pender Street.
Yeah.
And we traverse 2-3 blocks and walk to East Georgia Street, where the H.Y. Louie family started.
Oh, very cool. And so how did you decide what to actually put in and include in the tour? There must be, so much material. This family has had such a long legacy here, and they've done a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it certainly was a challenge to really whittle down the story because the Louies have such a rich and diverse history, starting with Hokiat, the pioneer who paid the head tax in 1898. By 1903, was able to open his first business in Vancouver, Chinatown, and then eventually in 1908 open the Kwong Chong Company, which then turned into H.Y. Louie at 255 East Georgia. And so in consulting with his grandson, Brant Louie, current operator of the H.Y. Louie Company, where we were able to really just focus on how this family started out with really humble beginnings, overcame incredible challenges, as all Chinese Canadians did in the face of direct discrimination and racism, but then really pass on their legacy to the next generations, where they were able to diversify and grow the company. So we really follow that journey from, a man who came here with really nothing and then passed the torch now to the fifth generation of the family, well over 120 years later.
Yeah, for sure.
And if I may add, just in summary, from a timeline standpoint, we go from the early 1900s all the way to present day. So in the short span of 2 hours, we're going to walk you through about 110 years.
Oh, wow. It's going to be a quick walk.
Yes.
Lots to go through. Larry, you're so passionate about this project. What do you love so much about it?
Well, Chinatown is a living museum, as you heard Sarah say. We are very fortunate that we live in a city where a lot of these buildings are intact, and a lot of the stories have not unfolded because they have not been told. It's not been in our textbooks. And through this exhibition, and I'm so excited about the Chinese Museum, is that these stories will now unveil itself. And most of us haven't had the opportunity to learn some of these stories. We may know fragments of it, and we're going to help tie it together so it makes sense for you.
Right, for sure. And you know, the Louis are such like a family that helped build some of the foundations of the city, but not a name that you really know of, right? Unless you're well versed in the history of the city.
Well, that's what's really exciting. I think a lot of people identify with London Drugs, IGA, as really household names. But then when you tell them that a Chinese Canadian family, well over 120 years, founded this company, they're just amazed. And I think it brings a lot of pride, especially to our Chinese Canadian community, to say, oh, wow, look at all of these hardships. It wasn't a simple journey. As successful as this family was, the challenges that they overcame really resonate with a lot of the communities across the province.
Yeah, our goal is really to tell you a story. And I don't know if you, as a kid, I was not keen on history because a lot of facts, but we do this through storytelling. And the way to do that is really give you that span of time and immerse you in the space so that you're enveloped by the story.
Right, and I love this idea that you actually walk some of the steps that they went through, you know, from that beginning. So what do you think everyone in BC should know about H.Y. Louie and his legacy, Larry?
Well, the story spans several generations because the H.Y. Louie family started with Hoc Yat back at the turn of the last century to today. And there's 4 generations of the family that has carried on the business. So it's a family story, but it's also a business story. And that's what's wonderful about it. And that's how most of us grow up. We work, but we live. And these are the streets that they lived in. And it's absolutely an honor for Sarah and I to tell the story and walk the streets.
Yes.
Can I add to that?
Yeah,
I think what really speaks to me is that even though Hoc Yat Louie encountered the anti-Asian race riots and a lot of municipal and provincial policies that tried to drive out Chinese business owners, he always committed himself and his family to giving back. And so we have these really special letters, handwritten in traditional Chinese by Hoc Yat Louie when he was in China, the year that he passed away. So he's writing to his eldest son, Tim. He left behind the vision he had for his family, which they follow as the business model and mantra today. And a lot of it was about being kind, being charitable, and you can see that the family still really walks the talk in terms of making sure they don't forget their roots and that they give back to the community that really made them successful today.
It's really quite a legacy. All right, so how long is the exhibit on for? I hear that it may have been extended.
Yes, so I'm happy to announce that we are extending the exhibition well into the new year. The Chinese Canadian Museum is really preparing for our grand opening at the Wing Sang building, the oldest one in Chinatown, in July 2023. But until then, we have our exhibitions on display at the Hon Sing at 27 East Pender, and we'll be offering more tours in the new year.
Okay, all right. We all look forward to seeing the new building, of course. But until then, a couple more months to go and check out this tour and exhibit. Thank you so much to the two of you for joining us today.
Thank
you for having us.
The Chinese Canadian Museum is running seeds of success well into the new year. Meanwhile, the Museum of Vancouver is also delving into Chinese Canadian history. It has an exhibit offering a look at the ban the city had on Cantonese barbecue. Take a look.
It's pure and simple racism. Why they wanted to ban makes no sense because there was reputedly 2 people who died of food poisoning in Tacoma, Washington, from barbecue meat that was not from a Chinese meat store. It was from a supermarket, and apparently it was chicken. Lighthead, Vancouver, da 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 da. This occurrence happened in '65 in Tacoma. Well, what was happening throughout Canada and the United States? The purposeful means to try and eliminate, quote unquote, what the city saw as blighted areas. And we all know that Chinatown wasn't just Chinatown. There was the Italian community there, the Black community. It was a cluster of marginalized peoples. And the Chinese were the largest population in that area. So there was a big fight. The Chinatown merchants came out in full force. There were allies in the community. There has been this thread throughout the history that, yes, Chinese are good laborers, but let's keep them in their place. Don't let them be successful. So we are fortunate to continue to have barbecue meats because of the good fight that happened.
The natural beauty of our province continues to inspire so many of you to go outside with your cameras and share your images with us. This week is for the birds. So many birds. First, Warren Lowe lives in the Caribou region. This grouse visits his backyard in search of juniper berries and spruce needles. And Jane Lemon happened on this bald eagle having a fresh salmon snack up in the safety of a tree. And finally, longtime contributor Richard Topping shows us this robin in Richmond. That is a gorgeous photo. That could be a Christmas card. Thank you, Richard. Send us more. You can email them to bcphotos@cbc.ca. That's bcphotos, all one word, @cbc.ca. This month, CBC British Columbia launched a new podcast hosted by Gigs 10 investigative journalist Angela Sterrett. It's called Land Back and explores who owns the land we live on. The podcast's premiere episode dives into a crucial court case known as Delgamuukw and how, even after the Supreme Court of Canada ruled in favor of the Gigs 10 and Wet'suwet'en, land rights in BC remain unfinished business. Take a look.
We never gave up our land. We never lost it in war. We never signed it away in treaty. It's still ours.
But Canadian governments have refused to acknowledge that, green-lighting resource project after project for decades.
45 years ago, we declared our relationship to the land and made a declaration about our lands here. 35 years ago, we filed a court action in the Supreme Court of BC. And then 25 years ago, that same court action finally made its way through the Supreme Court of Canada. So 25 years, the impacts of that were great.
All those years ago, the Gitxaans, along with the Wet'suwet'en, took their fight all the way up to the highest court of the land. Hereditary Chief Delgamuukw was the lead plaintiff for the Gitxaan and Gisdewe for the Wet'suwet'en, and they won. The case proved Indigenous people in BC had land rights that had not been extinguished by colonization, and it confirmed oral testimony as legitimate as other forms of evidence. But it was not a declaration of title. Meaning then optimistic leaders are feeling less hopeful today.
What happened to the Delgamuukw case? The Constitution is 40 years old this year. The court case is 25 years old this year. What have you done about it?
Today, the Crown controls 89% of land in Canada. The rest is primarily privately owned. Indian Reserve land, also controlled by the Crown, is 0.2% of Canada's landmass, and legal scholars put land Indigenous people hold through settlement claims at around 7%.
It's shameful that today we haven't moved as we should have in the mid-1990s when the Delgamuukw case was issued by the Supreme Court.
The Delgamuukw case did break ground for others, like the Tsilhqot'in case that led to the first declaration of Aboriginal title in Canada. But it's one of hundreds that aim to confirm title.
The only way we make change, even though it's piecemeal, is having to keep going back to court because Canada doesn't want to enact and implement the decisions that are coming down in the Supreme Court of Canada. If they did, then we wouldn't have to keep going back to court.
Defining what title is really some tragic unfinished business that we have in Canada. But it's time, in my mind, to start taking a risk, moving away from our position of power, putting our swords down and sitting down with communities to hash out what that is.
While Gitxaans have pushed back against the Crown and companies for more than a century, hoping to protect land like this for future generations, the fight against logging and resource extraction isn't over.
This rail line across Gitxaan territory has been blockaded for over 100 years at this point.
The most recent was to support the Wet'suwet'en land defenders after a raid that made national headlines.
This is the spot where the blockade was set up. That occupation lasted for around 2 days, with the RCMP keeping surveillance and amassing over on that bank while the Giksan were amassed over on this bank along the highway.
And then there were the police, not just the beat cops, but those from the Community Industry Response Group, a unit that takes aim at energy industry incidents.
Like, they did not need to use assault rifles here. They did not need to come and terrorize our people in the way that they did. They did not even attempt diplomacy before bringing in those paramilitarized RCMP. And it's pretty clear that that's the status quo in this country. That's how they handle Indigenous descent. That's how they handle the fact that we own the title to these territories, because Canada has no title here.
This is sovereign Wet'suwet'en land. You are trespassing.
As for police, they say they're just following orders.
I'm proud of what my members in Kirk do each and every day. They have made numerous arrests. To date, we have no one injured to the point where we've had to have anybody, the Independent Investigation Office hasn't looked into any of our activities. We've conducted our duties in a professional manner, enforcing Supreme Court injunctions and enforcing the law to the best of our ability.
As for the provincial government, they wouldn't talk to us for this story.
How do things look 20, 30 years from now? Can I look into my grandchild's eyes and say, we fought it? I thought that the fight would have been over 25 years ago, and 25 years later, here we are still fighting.
The legacy of the Delgamuukw here runs deep, but for the next generation of land defenders, the work to have the Ayuk, or the laws, and the Lakyip, or the land, recognized remains unfinished. Angela Sterrett, CBC News, Gitnamax.
Coming up, all you need to know about snow squalls. Johanna Wagstaff explains the lakeside weather phenomenon that's been hitting Ontario hard recently.
Have you ever been driving along on a late fall, early winter day, blue skies all around, when suddenly visibility is near zero as intense snow surrounds you? That may be a snow squall. Rather than a physical storm system rolling through, this snow is caused by cold air racing over the relatively warm and unfrozen bodies of water. Now, the temperature difference between the surface of the water and the air around it has to be greater than 13 degrees. And I just love that there's a rule of thumb for this. As the cold air races across the water, the length being called the fetch, it picks up all of that moisture. Once it hits the friction of land on the other side, the lee side, all of that moisture condenses and the clouds dump it in the form of intense snow squall bands. That air also gets pushed upward, huge convective turns, which create the friction and ultimately electricity for thunder and lightning. Yes, thunder snow. Usually we get these cold winds coming from the north in the Great Lakes, and they are quite common in the fall and early winter before the lakes freeze up. Every once in a while, those winds come from the southwest, which means they have much longer to travel across Lake Ontario and Lake Erie. And Buffalo, the infamous location for over 100 centimeter snow dumps, is at the end of that longest stretch. This year, lake waters are running warmer than usual. That's a trend we'll continue to see with climate change. In fact, many of our lakes that in the past have frozen across Canada will no longer freeze in the next few decades. At the same time, those cold air outbreaks are becoming less common, but when they do happen, they are more intense. The connection is still unclear between climate change and snow squalls, but we know we will see more, so stay tuned. And now, you're Science Smart. If you have a science question on your mind, send me an email and I'll try to get it answered.
Thanks, Johanna. You are watching Our Vancouver. I'm Leanne Young. Take a look at this.
That looks so good.
That's an excerpt from a new teleseries called House Special. Vancouver chef and author Jackie Kai Ellis explores small-town Asian restaurants and the families that own them. And welcome back to Our Vancouver. So, Jackie, you said in that promo clip there that Chinese Canadian food is the ultimate comfort food. I agree with you. But takeout was a bit of a different story for you growing up than what we saw kind of there.
Yeah, absolutely. At home, there were lots of very light, elegant, light flavored dishes, dumplings that were boiled, not fried. Not a lot of fried food at home, but that's because my family has roots in northern China. And when you go out to a Chinese restaurant, especially back in the 70s and 80s, it was all about the fried food, the sweet and sour pork and the, almond chicken and all of that. So yeah, it's a little bit different, but still, it's comfort food for me now.
Totally. And then you get that reputation of having, greasy Chinese food, right? It's very different, though, than many of us have at home.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so how did this whole series come about? How did you get engaged in that project?
So it was around the time that there were lots of Asian hate crimes mounting in the city and around the world. And I started feeling like I was confronted with my own heritage and for the first time actually being afraid for my parents' safety. And I thought, why is it that I don't know about my Chinese Canadian heritage? That's such a shame. And the only thing I actually remembered was, in high school, maybe like a 5-minute talk about Chinese Canadians. And so when Black Rhino approached me about being the host of the show, I thought this is the perfect opportunity for me to learn alongside the viewer a history that is so rich and so long and something that I knew nothing about before I started.
Yeah, for sure. I think that was certainly a reckoning for so many of us, right? That was around like the COVID time, right? 2-3 years ago. Well, really great that you brought us along on the journey with you. So where did you go? Who did you meet?
We went to Penticton, Kelowna, Red Deer, Grand Prairie, like specific cities all around BC and Alberta. And we met up with some small town restaurant owners. And isn't it true that every single small town in Canada has a Chinese restaurant? So that's where we went. We went to the smallest places and sought out that restaurant owner. And we wanted to get their stories. What is their experience like? And also the history of immigration in that area along the railway system as well.
And so as you were going through this series, what stood out to you?
I think what stood out to me is that, how Chinese people don't say, I love you, but they cook a meal for you.
Yes.
And they don't say, hi, how are you? They say, hi, have you eaten yet?
食咗飯未, right? Have you had dinner yet, right? That's the greeting.
Yes. And as a person that sort of straddled Canadian culture as well as Chinese culture, I always wondered, why is this love so much about practicality? And what I learned is that this is actually generations and centuries long, through famine, through so much sacrifice, people coming here to work the railway system, leaving their families, knowing that they would never see them again. Of course, when they're expressing love, they're going to say, have you eaten yet? Because they've sacrificed their lives to be able just to feed their families. And that was their way of showing love. And so this has passed down generation after generation. And so when my mom cuts me a bowl of fruit to say, I love you, I really take that on a very different level now because I understand where this comes from.
Absolutely. It's so interesting. So what specifically, though, did you find through this journey was Canadian Chinese food? What did that look like?
Yeah, and this whole topic of authentic Chinese food seems to always come up. It bubbles up here and there. When you're eating sweet and sour pork, is that real Chinese food? Is that not? And what I think is that this is, it's Chinese food, but it is a genre of its own. It's Chinese Canadian food. It is immigrants who have come here, brought flavors of home to a certain degree, or techniques from home, found ingredients that they could find in a new home, and made food for people that they knew would sell. That was the thing, the practicality of being able to put food on their own families' tables too. And so this genre of food that was very appealing to the local people at that time became Chinese Canadian food.
Yeah, for sure. And sometimes it's just a product of just the ingredients that they even had access
Absolutely,
to, right?
yeah.
I have a feeling you had tried a lot of ginger beef along the way.
I did, yeah.
Okay, who had the best ginger beef? BC, Alberta, is it a duel?
There is no competition, hands down. It was Silver Inn in Calgary, which is the original ginger beef.
Okay.
Sadly, they have since closed, but it was one of the most revelatory dishes I've had, and I did not expect to love it as much.
Okay, tell me why. I need to know.
Okay, so normally, this is what I went in thinking ginger beef would be.
To be honest, I haven't actually eaten ginger beef. I feel like I haven't really had it, so.
It is, let me just describe the dish. It is typically kind of like like long sticks of beef, deep fried, and then put in sort of like a sweet and sour sauce. It's kind of like sweet and sour pork. But when I had it at the original place in Calgary, it was crispy fried to a point where it was never soggy. It was always crispy, even when you put it into the sauce. And the sauce was not cloying. It was very vinegary, but light and elegant. And it was like almost like a watery sauce.
Oh.
And then you coated the beef in it, and it was like you were just tasting crispy fried beef with this sort of like impregnation of vinegar and spices. It was so good.
Oh,
anyway.
that sounds so delicious. Yeah, because my
impression
impression always sounds like it's like starchy, but it doesn't sound like that, quite starchy at all.
Not at all. I have
Cool.
no idea how he made it so crispy too.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. And you've also brought a tray of delights for us. So what do we have on the table here?
So this is a tray of togetherness, and soon coming will be Chinese New Year. This is very traditional for Chinese New Year to have 8 different compartments of delights that you would put out for Chinese New Year. And each of these things usually has a meaning to them. So for example, peanuts and candied ginger would have the meaning of like health and prosperity. And pineapple here has the meaning of success in business. See, always practical.
Right.
And of course, no explanation needed for this,
Yes,
right?
always about the money.
Yeah, exactly.
And even the number 8, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it means prosperity. Cool. All right. Okay. I feel like I need to try a piece of this.
Yeah, try. And of
delicious.
course, you remember these.
The White Rabbit. So
Yeah.
nostalgic, these candies. They're kind of like milky, delicious.
Yes.
All right, well, so lovely to have you here, Jackie. Tell us, where do we watch this series?
So you watch this TELUS Optic Channel 8 video on demand, and then also on www, I guess I don't need to say that part, housespecialseries.com. There you go.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much for being here today. Jackie Kai Ellis, always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Elaine from The Lobsterman. You are watching our Vancouver.
Hello city, hello city, hello city.
If you want to go see some live music, the Bare Naked Ladies are back together and on tour. They bring their sizable song list to the Center December 1st. And if you want harder rock, Saskatchewan's Sheepdogs play the Commodore the same night.
Hey, Grant Lawrence here from CBC Music with one of the year's best songs for your playlist today. And it's from a young singer-songwriter from tiny Shelburne, Ontario. Now, before I get to the latest single, here's the song that first had fans sit up and take notice of the talent that is Ruby Waters.
We got ourselves a dream, so let's create it. Jump into the game and go play it. Take what weigh me down, I wait it. If you got something to say, then go and say it. No, say it, no, say it, baby, baby. It's been a long, long time that I've been tapped up in the sweet sublime.
That is Ruby Waters with Sweet Sublime from back in 2018. That is her first single, which took off when a live performance of her playing the song was posted on Reddit. Now, as mentioned, Ruby Waters is from Shelburne, which previous to Ruby was most famous for the annual Canadian Championship of old-time fiddling. Her dad is of Slovakian descent, and her mom, who is Ruby's musical inspiration, is from northern Quebec and of Métis descent. Ruby says that she learned a lot from her musical parents, who were in a touring country band while they raised their family. So Ruby was exposed to the stage and the road from an early age. Ruby Waters also cites her Métis roots as further inspiration for the songs that she writes, often from the perspective of those who aren't as well off as others. That's young Ruby Waters performing her single Blow at the 2022 Juno Awards, where she was nominated for Alternative Album of the Year for her record, If It Comes Down to It. Blow was also ranked amongst the best songs of the year by CBC Music. Now, we're in the midst of putting together our top 100 songs of 2022, and I'm making a pretty educated guess that Ruby Waters is going to place pretty up there on that list with her excellent new single from this year called Open Arms.
And I anticipate all of the time, but lots of different things I like to cross the line. If it fits in my hand, then you'll know for sure that I'll get 10 and do them, then I'll get 10 more. Let's go somewhere with some fresh air. Tell me what you need, I'll help you get there. Sing with me when you're all alone, and I will be there to mend your broken bones. Ain't no way afraid of the trip I'm about to take. No, now I welcome it with open arms.
That's Ruby Waters with Open Arms, her positive, life-affirming hit single from 2022 that has already hit #1 on the CBC Music Top 20 and will likely place on our top 100 songs of the year. Watch for Ruby Waters on tour all over North America this fall, with plenty of dates in Western Canada starting this week. Open Arms by Ruby Waters is the song that you need to add to your playlist. I'm Grant Lawrence from CBC Music. I'll check in with you again soon.
Coming up, meet the Vancouverites who are inventing the next version of the internet. Yes, our city is a metaverse hub, both virtually and in real life. Welcome back to Our Vancouver. I'm Leanne Young. When I say the word metaverse, what comes to mind? Well, it's at the forefront of our digital lives, and Vancouver sits at the very front of it, with a community of innovators playing in a world that is still very much being defined. What is it and what might it do? We asked some local creators.
What is my definition of the metaverse? This is really hard because I feel like, it's still being defined.
To me, the metaverse is the next internet. It's the internet, but you're in the internet rather than looking at the internet, and a lot more interactive. Rather than pressing keyboards or moving a mouse, it's now going to be about hand gestures and about using your body to interact with content or to engage with content.
We will be using metaverses in the same way that we're using Web 2 applications right now. Instead of having Zoom calls, you're going to be in the metaverse having those meetings.
A lot of people think that the technology will bring us further apart, but I actually think it'll connect us closer together.
Well, there's a revolution going on in rec rooms, offices, and classrooms around the world. A revolution in which 15 million people are taking part. They're sharing scientific data, arguing philosophy, or passing on cooking tips and gossip night and day through a computer network called Internet.
Nobody says, hey, I'm going on cyberspace to google.com. But there for a little while, cyberspace was a catch-all for people who weren't directly involved in the kind of emerging internet ecosystem to say, hey, something big is coming down the line. I can't quite articulate it, but I think it's really important to be able to name it. And that's kind of what the metaverse is. There's a lot of tools, functionality, changes that are coming towards us, and we can feel that energetic momentum, but people don't right now have the language to break it into the actual specifics of changes, and so it's easier to have an umbrella.
The real metaverse really hasn't been fully realized yet. It's going to be like the internet, where you'll be able to go into various metaverses, but there will be one centralized metaverse that isn't controlled by anyone. It's controlled by the people, which is really intriguing to me.
Think about sports events, gaming events, musical concerts, comedian shows of any sort. These things are going to be happening in the metaverse, and the people that own the spaces are going to be the ones that build the future and also probably profit.
A lot of the metaverse will be powered by Web3.
It's not just about applications and data, right? It's about creativity and art. And it's really cool, being a technologist and entrepreneur, is that I get to work with artists all day, right? I get to look at art, create these cool mechanics, and just really think about, what the world wants.
There's going to be people who pave the way, and there's going to be learning along the way, and I think that's the big thing right now is people are just exploring.
This is kind of the shift from mobile computing, the internet, into Web3, which will permeate throughout our daily lives and will affect almost everyone in the world.
This is our Vancouver.
Coming up, from India to Uganda and ultimately to Canada, a personal refugee story for one BC family. You are watching Our Vancouver. I'm Leanne Young. Time to mark a notable moment in our history and the legacy it left. 50 years ago, thousands of Ugandans came to Canada as refugees. Among them, the family of one of our journalists. The CBC's Corey Correa took this anniversary to hear from them as they reflect on their remarkable journey leaving Uganda for a new life in Canada.
Let's start at the beginning. After staging a coup in 1971, military leader Idi Amin became the president of Uganda. The dictator took an extreme approach to African nationalism. He accused Asians of sabotaging the country's economy, and on August 4, 1972, he announced the country's residents of Asian descent, nearly 80,000 people, had 90 days to leave. These people were second and third generation Ugandans, recruited from countries like India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh by the former British regime to work as laborers, merchants, and civil servants. Under the threat of violence, about 50,000 Asian Ugandans fled for safety by the November 8th deadline, uprooting their families, leaving behind their homes, businesses, money, and belongings, and seeking refuge in whichever country would take them. Canada agreed to accept 4,400 refugees, but took in a couple thousand more. Among them were my grandparents and 5 of their 6 children who were still in Africa. They flew into a Canadian Forces base in Montreal in late October before arriving in Vancouver, their future home. My Uncle Sam, the oldest of the siblings to make the journey, had just turned 19. I wanted to take my uncle around town to awaken some of his earliest memories in the city, to try and get an idea of what my family experienced during their first few months in a strange new world. So Uncle Sam, 50 years later, almost to the date, this was your first point of contact in Vancouver. What are you feeling being back here?
I am really glad that
my parents decided to bring us to Canada. It was amazing. The buildings, the architecture, the roads, it was thrilling. Everything was new and exciting.
This is the Mayfair Hotel, or it used to be.
Yes.
Where you guys first came to stay when you came to Canada?
It is.
Does it look the same?
Doesn't look anything like it used to. I've always wanted to come in here for the few times that I've been downtown and I've near this place, but I was afraid the doorman wouldn't let me in.
What was your stay like here?
It was a one-bedroom suite. We were 6 of us, but we made do because that's all we had.
This is the place where you first got a job. Not this Whole Foods, but whatever was here before.
Yes, it was a steakhouse. Myself and my brother got a job as dishwashers. It was great. Nobody bothered us, although I never tasted a steak in all the time that I worked here.
Found the old photos from the basement. My grandmother was born in 1931 in Western Uganda. After 40 years there, growing up, getting married, working as a secretary, and raising 6 children, she was forced out. These photos were among the few possessions you took?
Yes.
From Uganda when you had to leave?
Yeah. This was in Uganda. That's my mother's home.
Tell me about the expulsion order. Where were you when you heard about it?
I was at work, and then my boss told me to, go home. And the children, of course, came from school. I told them what had happened. That there was going to be trouble. Came at us like a bomb.
My great-uncle Willie found out about the order while he was in Munich, competing in the Olympic Games. He was on the Ugandan field hockey team, preparing to represent the same country that was kicking him out.
We had no time for all the stuff. We left our apartment, our cars, and somebody drove us to the airport. And that stretch of the airport was, 6 or 7 stops by the Uganda Army. And they were taking whatever money you had in your pockets, your gold, your silver. They stripped all the Asians of anything valuable they had on them.
We didn't care because we were worried about our lives more than our possessions.
Then how did you guys end up in Canada? I heard that it was your idea.
No, it wasn't my idea. It was my husband. He heard that, Canada was the best place. So that's how we came out here.
Do you think back to Uganda at any point, and does it make you upset thinking that they, kicked 3 generations of your family out of the country?
Not at all. I think back fondly because during the winters especially, I long for the heat.
Strange that we could just leave something that is yours personally and go and live in a country, come here with nothing and start a new life from scratch. But we did, and we are happy for it.
Reflecting on 50 years in Canada, you raised 6 kids here, 12 grandkids, 8 great-grandkids. What do you think about all that you've built?
I think that is a wonderful thing.
Corey Correa, CBC News, Vancouver.
And that's all for our Vancouver this week. I'll see you on CBC News Vancouver later tonight. Bye for now.